The simulation theory was formulated by Nick Bostrom, Professor of Philosophy. Now, according to this theory, the world we live in is nothing but a simulation, and the entity or entities responsible for running this simulation could either be post-humans, who are human beings that have evolved to such an extent that they can no longer be called human beings, or some alien race that is far superior to us. And the goals behind running such a simulation could be educational. So, for example, if those post-humans wanted to learn about their ancestors, us, they would run a simulation and watch it. The goals could also be for fun or entertainment, or some other goals we don't know about. It is clear that this theory is heavily influenced by the huge improvements the world of video games has known throughout the last decades. So us, humans, are more like NPCs, non-player characters. Now, if you've ever played a video game or seen somebody play a video game, you would notice that there are some characters that are controlled by players, and there are some other characters that are not controlled by players, but that are scattered around the world. They do not do a whole lot, but you would expect that with time and with more computing power, they would have something akin to a free will. Now, there are many arguments that are used to defend this theory. For example, just like characters in video games, us humans deal with what things appear to be rather than what things are. So, for example, when you stretch your arm and touch a table, you do not touch the reality of the table, which is made of atoms and molecules that are in movement, but you expect to touch one single block, and you do touch one single block. The same thing happens in video games. For example, when a character jumps towards the back of a horse, it lands on the back of a horse, but in reality there is no horse, because everything in a video game is just lines of code. So the character does not interact with the reality of that horse, which is line or lines of code, but it interacts with what this horse appears to be. Another argument used to reinforce this theory is that just like in video game worlds, there are glitches, little errors, so no matter how well designed the video game is, you would always find some little glitches and errors. The same thing happens in our world. For example, there are Siamese twins that are twins who are born joint, and this is not the normal way people are born, nor is it the normal way twins are born. Now, it could be argued that the simulation theory was some way forced by the tremendous improvements that the world of video games has known, but there is a number of philosophers who have lived throughout different eras when there were no video games, and yet those philosophers alluded to our world, to the possibility that our world is a simulation. Now, first we'll speak about Plato and his theory of forms, which is very important in this regard. Now, according to the theory of forms, everything we deal with in this world, the chairs, the tables, the geometrical forms like triangles, circles, and even concepts like fidelity and courage, are pale copies of purer things that exist in a purer world. So if you take this idea, for example, and use it to examine a word vis-a-vis the words in video games, you would understand that the weapons, the horses, the houses, and everything you see in video games are pale copies of purer things that exist in a world. But if you take this same idea and use it to examine the simulation theory, which is more akin to what Plato had in mind, you would understand that everything we have in this world is nothing but a replica of purer things that exist in the world of the entity or entities that run the simulation. Zhuangzi, a famous Chinese philosopher, tells a very interesting story. He speaks about a time when he slept and dreamed he was a butterfly, and during that dream he would act in the same way a butterfly would act. He would flutter from one flower to another, he would fly in the air and do everything a butterfly does. Now, after that he wakes up and wonders. He wonders whether he was a man who dreamed he was a butterfly, or that he was a butterfly that was dreaming it was a man. Now, his confusion emanates from the fact that the feelings and the sensations he experienced during the dream while being a butterfly were so real, so believable, that they were indistinguishable from the feelings and the sensations he experiences in his man state. So for him it was extremely difficult to differentiate between what was reality and what was a dream, because if you rely on feelings and sensations, those same feelings and sensations were experienced with the same intensity during that dream. This is a direct hint to the simulation theory. René Descartes, the most famous French philosopher, noticed something interesting. He noticed that with time, many of the convictions and ideas he used to hold dear turned out to be wrong. So he wanted to ascertain that the ideas and convictions he had at that particular time would not become obsolete with time and would not become wrong. So he used an interesting analogy. He said that if you had a box of apples and you were told that in that box you had good apples and rotten ones, the best way to sieve the good ones was to throw everything on the ground and to take every apple on its own, examine it carefully, and then put back in the box the good apples and discard the bad ones. And this is what he did with his ideas, his convictions, and everything he held dear. He threw them away. He relinquished them. And then again, he was faced with an even graver problem. He noticed that human beings use their senses when they want to verify the veracity of something, and senses were not the most reliable things on earth. Now, oftentimes our senses fail us. There is the example of mirage, when people see water on a hot roast where there is no water. It is a fact that different people see colours differently, and the examples of our senses failing us are very numerous. So Descartes was baffled. He could not ascertain the veracity of anything except one thing. The only thing that was verifiable was the fact that Descartes was doubting, and from this fact, only one other fact was also verifiable, and it was that Descartes was a conscious being, because nothingness cannot doubt. So if Descartes was doubting, it meant that Descartes was a conscious being, but here it didn't necessarily mean that Descartes had 2 arms, 2 legs, or had a human body, or anything like that, because all those things were only verifiable through senses, and senses were not very trustworthy. Again, this is a direct hint to the simulation theory. Now, there are other philosophers who have alluded to the simulation theory, but I have chosen to speak about those 3 ones because they lived in different areas and during different eras, and they subscribe to different schools of thought. Now, this video has reached its end. If you like to thumb it up, if you dislike to thumb it down, what you think matters. And until we meet again, have a great day.